Dear colleagues, hello everyone. Welcome to this webinar, a conversation with colleagues from the Young Lives Initiative by the Oxford Department of International Development. My name is Noelia Richard. I lead the United Nations Development Program's Global Youth Team, and I'm based in New York. As you know, UNDP works for and with young people in about 100 countries and territories, supporting their positive role in development and peace processes, promoting their civic engagement and political participation, opening up avenues for them to meaningfully participate in decision-making in relation to climate action, for instance, and supporting their youth economic empowerment, among others. I'm here with my colleague Julia Iacovella, a youth analyst in the team as well, and the Young Lives team. Young Lives team who will present an overview of 20 years of policy-driven research, which has been following 12,000 children from the turn of the millennium through to their coming of age during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we will be together for about 1 hour, and immediately after the presentations by the team, I'll be giving the floor to two additional colleagues and partners of ours, Pratit Singh from India, from an initiative called the COVID Under 19 initiative, and Sudha Balakrishnan, who's the head of the Youth 2030 Secretariat at the Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, and with whom we're working hard to establish a robust monitoring framework and operationalizing the United Nations Youth Strategy called Youth 2030. This session is recorded and the presentation will be made available, and we hope that today will mark the beginning of a long conversation and a long collaboration also amongst our different entities. Once again, thank you all for making the time, and without further ado, let me kickstart the series of presentation by giving the floor to Dr. Renu Singh, who's the country director at Young Lives India, and who will introduce the Young Lives Initiative. Dr. Singh, could you please tell us a little bit about the program itself, and also share reflections in particular about how Young Lives has been engaging with young people and with policymakers. Dr. Singh, you have the floor. Thank you. We don't see the slide yet, but that might be normal because there is a little bit of delay sometimes. So we see the document list, and I think it will open. Let's give it a few seconds, and thanking everyone again for joining.
डिसेबल करके सबसे पहले अपना पेपर ऑन कर लीजिए.
I'm struggling a little bit. I think we're having a little bit.
That's fine. Take your time. It might be that yeah, there is an issue. If anyone otherwise has access to this presentation,
yeah, I'll just ask Saltanat, could you just put it up? You have this. Yeah, just share on your behalf if you want.
Sure. I'll do that now. I'll do that now.
Yeah. If you could just give the screen share to Saltanat.
Let's just make sure your colleague is also a co-host, and then we should be able.
That's right. That's right.
Perfect. So we see the first slide, I think.
You can see the first slide?
Yes. That starts.
Yes, we can see the first slide, which is Young Lives.
Okay.
Thank you, Saltanat.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think Saltanat, I'm handling it. This is my screen share, I guess, right?
Yes.
Okay, this is mine. Okay, thank you. Sorry for this. So yes, very happy to be here, and thank you to all our colleagues in UNDP for organizing this. I'm going to give just a short overview of the Young Lives project. I have other colleagues with me here from Oxford as well as from the country teams. So we've been, we're a project that has been following 12,000 young people, as Noella just said, in Ethiopia, India, Peru, and Vietnam since the turn of the millennium. It's a pro-poor sample with an equal number of boys and girls. The exciting thing is that we've been doing this now for almost over 2 decades, and we've grown old with these young people ourselves. And we've been really fortunate to get a peek into their lives. They've shared their experiences, and we've seen them growing up across 4 countries, which are located in 4 continents. And we have our main, team in Oxford, but we also have country offices in each of the 4 countries where there are country directors, and there are a team of researchers based in universities, both for the quantitative survey as well as the qualitative mixed method survey, which we conduct. So we've been, since it's a mixed method study, we've already done 5 survey rounds which have been face-to-face, and we never thought we would do anything else other than face-to-face surveys, because that's what we've been doing since the turn of the millennium. We've also done 4 waves of qualitative survey, which have been the longitudinal survey in 3 of the countries, and in fact, we've done 5 in Ethiopia. That's the only country where we've done the 5th round of survey. And of course, we did 3 telephone surveys last year when the pandemic came in 2020. So what we've been doing is we've been following 2 cohorts across these 4 countries, 3,000 in each of the 4 countries, Peru, Ethiopia, India, and Vietnam. And the 2 cohorts who were initially aged 1 and 8 are now 19 and 26. So we've actually seen them grow into young adults through adolescence and through childhood. And if you look at this slide in front of you, you can see the younger cohort who were 1 when we began our first round in 2002, turned 19, last year, and now they're actually 20 in 2021. Where we were hoping to do a face-to-face survey, but it seems again we will do more telephone surveys this year, but we do hope to be able to meet them very soon in person and to be able to take up our fieldwork again. And the 8-year-old older cohorts in 2002, now young adults this year are 27. Last year when we did the phone surveys, they were 26. They also have babies of their own now. And so we have a new generation, which would be really interesting to follow, because we actually have a lot of children born pre-COVID and during the COVID, and this could be a new COVID cohort, of course. So we always look for new exciting things which we can do with cohorts, of course. But just to say that we've also been doing other surveys, qualitative, which I've mentioned to you, 4 qualitative surveys in 3 of the countries and 5 in Ethiopia, and a lot of sub-studies, which, because every time we did a survey, there were many interesting questions which came up. So questions related to child labor as children were growing up, adolescent decision-making, child marriage and teenage pregnancy. And now, of course, as they've transitioned into the labor market, and many of them moving into higher education, many new questions about family formations, have come up, and which we would really like to take up in more qualitative studies as well, because some questions, related to you will hear more about the questions that were raised during the COVID telephone surveys, especially those related to the labor market, mental health, a whole lot of issues that have come up. The burden on young women, for example, during COVID needs to be explored. So like I said, we have key components of our survey, the household survey, where the caregivers have been interviewed. Remember, they were children and now they're adults themselves. So of course, now we don't interview caregivers. But we've also been doing the children interviews right from the start in the survey. which is, and along with that, anthropometric measures in every round. Psychosocial aspects have been covered, so subjective well-being, as well as other aspects such as self-efficacy, self-concept, their own aspirations, their parents' aspirations, all that has been gathered in all our survey rounds. And what is very interesting is that we can actually not only do intra-cohort analysis, but also inter-cohort analysis. Because if you see the earlier slide, we can compare the 8-year-old younger cohort in 2009 with the 8-year-old older cohort in 2002. So you can actually do inter-cohort comparisons because they're 7 years apart. And for example, you can compare the 15-year-old younger cohort in 2016 with the 15-year-old older cohort in 2009. So for example, in India, we could do some very interesting analysis of how, I can see some Indian colleagues here, from Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan was only launched post 2009. So we could see the impact of the Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan on the younger cohort because they go to the same communities, they belong to the same, they're going to the same school. So what are the, their outcomes compared to the older cohort at the same age? So you can also do inter-cohort comparisons, which are very interesting. And of course, we can look at, the qualitative sample, which is a smaller subsample, which gives us more in-depth analysis. But we've also got offsprings, so within the households, we can also do intra-household comparisons because we've got sibling data, for example. We also do some community information we gather, and we do these community surveys in every round. So you get a very good sense of what changes have happened at the community level. And along with this, we've been doing school effectiveness survey, both at the primary level and at the secondary level, to understand what experiences and learnings are happening within schools, because otherwise the household survey, even though we capture cognitive achievement tests of children in every round, they don't really cover schooling and teaching practices. So we have done these surveys as well, which have been very useful. And of course, in 2020, we did the 3 telephone surveys. We also wanted to know what is the impact of COVID on schooling. So we went back to the same headmasters that we had interviewed in 2016-17 in our secondary school survey. We went back to them and we were able to understand how schools are responding to the pandemic, what are the impacts on them, and we had some very interesting data come out of that. So all our publications, we will leave a link, of course, I think in the chat box, but all our papers are on the website, and please, you can refer to them. I think we have over 2,000 papers on our website from over the years. So we take a life course perspective because it's a longitudinal study. We're following the same children. Of course, many of them have now moved into new homes. They've also, migrated to new places. So we follow them. And we've had a very, very low attrition rate, which is wonderful. And I think the reason is because we have, for example, CES, which is our research partner in India, we've kept the same supervisors all these years. So they know the community well. There's already a rapport, of course, and that's why we could respond to the pandemic so quickly, because we could, in July, we were already calling our children, and they're not children, young youth and young adults and adolescents, and asking them if they were okay with doing, phone surveys with us, and they were all very happy. Of course, they asked why we weren't coming and doing the field survey face to face. But the reason we could do this is because we track them between the rounds as well. And we understand if they've moved. We have telephone numbers of their relatives, their parents. Young girls who get married, often there's attrition. Husbands won't allow them to meet you, and a new stranger coming into the home. But often the parents will call the spouse and say, these are people who've been following this particular young girl for many, many years, and we know them, and it's okay for them to come and interview. So we've had very, very low attrition because of that. And what we have in this slide is it tells you how we're not only just following the young people and children's trajectories, agency, and the critical as periods that impact them through the longitudinal data and the cumulative disadvantage that some of them actually experience. But we also have been looking at household factors such as shocks, poverty, risk exposure, including climate change, and the aspects at the social and the community level, like the jobs and the job market, or the values and the norms that actually impact households and then the children, in fact, as well as how the nature of transitions are shaped by policy changes, at the national and the subnational level, and of course the resilience factors with which many of our young people have been able to come out of the most difficult circumstances. So I think the longitudinal data does allow us to do is link earlier causes and later consequences, which cross-sectional studies do not allow. We are able to identify timing of when certain circumstances and events matter the most, and how certain events can have both negative and positive impacts on successful transitions, say through secondary schooling for young people, and identify the way these developmental trajectories are embedded in changing households, institutional, community, and macroeconomic processes. So that's what I think we are able to do with our data. So what we are able to look at with our data is that use it as a powerful tool for policy analysis, focus on differences in terms of, we have a whole section on social protection programs in every country, what are the access, what is the kind of quality of the programs for these young people, and look at both long and short-term causes and consequences of multidimensional poverty by, like I said, doing both inter-cohort and intra-cohort comparisons. So I think there has been an increasing value of our data set using mixed methods as the rounds have increased, to be honest. First round, there wasn't that much we could say, it was like a cross-sectional study. But as we entered into the third round, now we're going into the, more than the fifth round, because it's 5++ with the telephone surveys. So I think this is how, there is definitely a value add to the data set as the number of years of our research is increasing. And the fact that I think we've had a lot of conversations in different countries, but each of the country, I think, is reporting that our response to the pandemic by changing the methodology was very prompt and very, very, I think, timely, which has been appreciated a lot. Because often you're not able to reach, for example, we had a meeting at Niti Aayog the other day, and one of the key things was that often people are using telephone databases to do telephone surveys, and they're not able to reach people who are the most marginalized. And here we already have a pro-poor sample, and we know how to contact them, how to get in touch with them, even if it is through a neighbor. So I think that's the huge value add of our data set. So yes, I think the biggest, and I think the fulcrum of our research is the voices of young people. We're able to see the kind of, they've informed us on the various aspects of their lives, and we would not be able to be here if it was not for them. So we acknowledge them as really being what makes our study tick, and thanks to them for wanting to continue to be. In fact, after the fifth round, we told them we don't know, we didn't have funding at that time, and we said we don't know if they're going to come back. And we had some of them, especially the qualitative sample, saying, almost crying and saying, no, but you must. And we said, but we don't do so much for you. And they said, no, but you listen to us, and I think that by itself also, the people ask us questions that you were supposed to be an observational research. Yes, but I think over the years there is bound to be some sort of impact of that as well, because you're constantly going back and giving them spaces to talk and share. So what we do believe is that large scale change can only be meaningfully attained by engaging with government machinery. And we've been doing this across countries. In Ethiopia, for example, they've very successfully worked with the Ministry of Women, Children and Youth, running the Child Research and Practice Forum for over 10 years. Alula is the country director for Ethiopia, and he's been doing this very successfully. They've also collaborated with the Ministry of Education over 3 rounds of school survey and actually worked on the pre-primary education design of the zero-class system, the preschool, at the preschool level. And they've given inputs to design of strategies over the years on various aspects, including looking at policy relevant sub-studies that have been worked out on safety nets, child labor, child marriage, parenting, violence, and also they are a member of various policy networks like Alliance to End Child Marriage, Child Research Practice Forum, Equity in Education Research Network. I think the reason why we do this is because we need to have more partners to be able to do this. And I'm going to just share a little bit of what we did do in India, just as a case study. So we, Young Lives India was just an offshoot of the University of Oxford for all these years. But in 2018, we set ourselves up as an independent entity, a research to policy center, because we were getting a lot of demand from the government and the ministries to do a lot of secondary data analysis. And Oxford felt we should be able to do all this without keeping on coming back to them and asking them if we should do this or not. And I think so we were really spurred to become an independent entity. So though we continue to take up the Young Lives study, but yes, we've also been appointed as a technical advisor for the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights since 2018. And we have been working in various working groups of the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Women and Child, the National Council of Educational Research and Training, the National Institute of Educational Planning. We've also been instrumental in doing a lot of work with UNICEF, for example, and undertaking capacity building in life skills across 8 states. And FCDO, in its ongoing investment, has given Young Lives India one of the highest ratings for impact in policy, classifying it as instrumental, often leading to complete overhaul of strategies. And this has really come from the work, and I'm going to just move on, that we did in child marriage. For example, we were asked by the Ministry of Women and Child and NCPCR to do a statistical analysis of child marriage using the census data. And we drilled it down to the district level and identified 25 districts which had the highest burden, and then did work at the district level. And we were asked, and we had Justice Mehta here on the right hand lower side, who asked us to come and share the findings with judges, sitting Supreme Court judges. And then we had this judgment passed where they quoted the report profusely, and actually earlier any sex with a underage wife was never considered rape, but this judgment actually called it marital rape if you for any young girl you were married, even if she was your wife. So for the first time we criminalized sex with a minor wife, and they used the findings from the study. So this was just to give you a little glimpse of the kind of work we do with the data that we've been analyzing. And just to say that this whole research was prompted by the fact that Young Lives found that almost, we had something like 37% of our girls married by age 19, with 28% married before 18. And when we disseminated this to the Women and Child Department, that's when they said we want more analysis. So how your research can prompt the government to respond in a more constructive manner. And then they said, let's make district action plans and let's do more work. So I think, yeah, just to give you a bit of a glimpse of the way we use the data from Young Lives. And now we fed this into the Jaitley Commission, which is looking at the age of marriage for girls and boys, and we've written a note for the ministry and we presented it to the commission. So we're using both our mixed methods, our quantitative and qualitative data. And just to say that young people, like I said, this is a quote from one of the young people who said, the participation helped me understand about the Young Lives research. It's to improve policies which impact our lives. So in the past, I did not know the objectives, but now I'm very aware that the research in which I'm involved helps to change government policies and programs. So even though this is in observational research, I think our young people understand how the evidence, impacts policy and programs. And what we constantly do is we go back to the districts and we do dissemination at the district level using more pictorial ways of disseminating so that people at the district and sub-district level where we gather the data from are able to use this data to inform intervention and policies. And we often have, this is the district collector office where she'll invite a whole lot of civil society members in that area, along with officials from across different departments, whether it's water sanitation or ICDS, but they all come together so that they can understand. And that's the wealth of Young Lives, that we don't work in one thematic area, we cuts across different thematic areas, whether nutrition, health, education, mental health, well-being, the whole lot. So that's all. I'm going to stop now and I'm going to stop sharing so that if there are any questions, or we'll wait later for the questions.
Yes, we will probably. Thank you so much, Dr. Singh. I mean, we will indeed wait for the end of the presentations, and after respondents have taken the floor to open up for questions. I'm sure that there will be many probably that we will have to discuss also offline. I mean, I also wrote it. Your points about the notion of self-concept, about the intercohort analysis. I mean, things that I'm sure we could deepen. I think it'd be really interesting also to know how you foster a safe space, for sure, in the context of the data collection, etc. So a lot of questions, I'm sure, are popping in our heads as we think about the initiative. And thank you very much. I think that was a very useful overview to get us started. And I'll now turn to Richard Front on really more the focus on the COVID-19 pandemic. Richard is a research assistant at Young Lives Oxford, and he will tell us about the data collected and analyzed in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic and how it has affected the well-being of young women and young men. Richard, you have the floor, and feel free to share your screen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Noella, can I just double check that you can see my screen now?
Yes, we see it very well, and we hear you loud and clear as well. Perfect,
thank you. And thank you so much, Renu, for that very clear and cogent explanation of the data. Much more well-informed about it than I am, having been involved a lot longer than I have. So I'm really going to just speak about one of the papers that we have, myself and some of my colleagues have come up using the COVID-19 data set that Renu said we collected during our 3 phone surveys in 2020, so last year. So the paper is entitled Young Lives Interrupted, as you can see. And what we really do is we use this 2020 phone surveys data, but take advantage of the longitudinal aspect of the Young Lives data to examine how the pandemic has impacted the lives of adolescents, or the younger cohorts, in all 4 of the Young Lives study countries. So we know that although the young, specifically adolescents, are at lower risk in terms of the direct health effects of the COVID-19 virus, the pandemic has certainly intensified the pressure on young people who are trying to complete their education and enter the labor market. So it's a really crucial time in their lives. And so consequently, the economic effects are likely to be long lasting for those at the beginning of their adult lives. What we do in this paper is we quantify how a cohort of adolescents, so our younger cohorts, have been impacted by the crisis. And again, we can use this unique comparable longitudinal data from 4 low and middle income countries with very different settings. So I'll briefly skim over the Young Lives study because Renu very cogently explained the data. But the main thing is that obviously we have our 2 cohorts, the younger and older cohorts, who've been visited in person 5 times since the turn of the millennium, and most recently in 2016. In 2020, as Renu explained, in light of the pandemic, we conducted a 3-part phone survey. And I've just put the dates of each of the phone calls on the screen there so you can get an understanding of the timing of the survey. So our primary call, which was our second call, was implemented between early August and mid-October 2020. So it's really the end date line of most of the data that we use in this analysis. And as Renu said, the phone survey was able to capture a very large proportion of our original sample. You can see up to nearly 92% of the original 2001 sample in India. And this includes, though, poor individuals living in rural areas, and even those without mobile phones or without internet access. And as Renu said, this was achieved via local guides or neighbors in the villages, which we're able to do given our long-standing relationship with the communities. And so briefly just re-showing the graphic of the different ages of the younger and older cohort at the different survey rounds. I just want to highlight again that in 2020, our younger cohort was aged 19 and the older cohort was aged roughly 26. But in this paper, it's the 19-year-old adolescent cohort who really at that critical juncture in their life that we focus on. So something that's really interesting about the 4 Young Lives study countries is that as of mid-October 2020, the 4 study countries had had very diverse experiences with regards to the pandemic. And this is true both in terms of the number of COVID-19 cases per capita and in terms of the policy responses. So table 1 over here shows the impact of COVID-19 in the 4 Young Lives study countries by the time that our second call was complete as of the 15th of October 2020. Although, we obviously must acknowledge that the situation has changed significantly since then, particularly with the rapid deterioration in India at the beginning of this year. But as of mid-October 2020, when we collected our primary data, the number of COVID-19 cases per capita differed dramatically between the 4 countries, with Vietnam having been exceptionally successful at limiting the spread of the virus, and Peru having been one of the worst affected countries in terms of both cases and deaths per capita in the entire world. So the question we wanted to ask then is, has this resulted in different experiences for the adolescents in our 4 countries? And firstly, what we found is that despite very different prevalences of the virus, one of the most common experiences across adolescents in all 4 countries was the negative impact that the pandemic had had on the economic situations of the households. So as you can see in figure 1 on the screen, even in Vietnam, where the number of reported cases had been very low, around 60% of adolescent households reported that they'd had either a fall in household income or a rise in household expenses. And clearly then, in Peru, Ethiopia, and India, these prevalences were even more severe, with over 93% of 19-year-old households, or households with our 19-year-olds in them, reporting at least one of the 2 economic shocks. So there really seems to be a hard economic effect in all 4 countries as a result of the pandemic. Then, analyzing educational enrollments, we found that the degree to which those who were in education before the pandemic experienced interruptions has also varied by country. Firstly, we found that the ability to continue learning remotely during lockdowns varied greatly. So in Peru and Vietnam, we found that roughly 80% of the younger cohort who were engaged in education were able to continue engaging with their teacher during the lockdowns, be this through in-person or virtual classes or some sort of online assignments. In India, we found that this dropped to only roughly 4 in every 10 of the 19-year-olds. And in Ethiopia, only 1 in every 10 of the younger cohorts participants managed to engage in learning activities with their teachers while the COVID-19 restrictions were kind of at their harshest. Then analyzing educational enrollment dropout status, we found that in Peru, which was the worst affected, 16% of our younger cohorts who were engaged in some sort of education before the pandemic had already dropped out or chosen not to re-enroll by mid-October 2020. And worryingly, around 1 in every 4 of those who dropped out said that they did so because due to the pandemic, they could no longer pay the required fees. Then we also analyzed time use and found that the pandemic has led to a significant change in the time use of adolescents in all 4 Young Lives study countries. In all of the countries, 19-year-old participants reported spending more time on domestic work and on childcare than before the lockdown or the pandemic started. In fact, nearly 80% of the 19-year-olds in Peru reported spending more time on domestic work, and roughly 40% in Vietnam reported spending more time on childcare. And what I've put in figure 2 on the screen over here, what I want to highlight is that we've also seen that households tend to resort to more discriminatory gender roles in times of stress, as the increase in household or domestic work and caring responsibilities has fallen disproportionately on females, while men have tended to work more in the family business. So for example, if you look at figure 2 at the bottom row at Ethiopia, on the right-hand side, you can see that roughly 70% of adolescent females reported spending more time on household chores or domestic work, compared to only 36% of adolescent males. But conversely, around 21% of the adolescent males in Ethiopia reported working more in the family business, compared to just 10% of the adolescent females. So there seems to be this reversion towards gender, more traditional gender roles that's been seen actually to some extent in all 4 countries. Then analyzing food insecurity, we found that running out of food during the pandemic was a serious concern in at least 2 of the 4 Young Lives study countries. So in figure 3 over here, you can see that in Ethiopia and in India, around 16% of our younger cohort households reported running out of food on at least one occasion since the beginning of the pandemic. And as you can also see on the graph, hopefully, is that this marks a significant movement away from the existing trend, with the proportion of younger cohort households who'd run out of food increasing by over 200% in both Ethiopia and in India relative to 2016, which was our last in-person survey round. Peru and Vietnam appear to have been less affected in terms of food insecurity, with Vietnam actually having shown improving food security during the pandemic year. But beyond just the descriptive statistics focusing only on the younger cohort, as Renu explained, one of the unique strengths of this multi-cohort Young Lives longitudinal data is that it provides an opportunity to compare the outcomes of the different cohorts at the same age, but at very different points in time. And so previous Young Lives research, comparing these 2 cohorts at the same age, for example, of 15 and 8, as I've highlighted, has shown that there's been a decline in the prevalence of stunting and in terms of time devoted to working. In fact, the younger cohorts were less likely to be stunted at age 15 in all 4 countries than the older cohort were at the same age, roughly 7 years previously. We've also seen, though, that in all countries, there's been a rise in educational enrollment rates in subjective well-being and in the highest grade completed, comparing the younger and older cohorts at the same age. In Peru and Vietnam, we've also seen actually that there's been an increase in learning outcomes in tandem with this increase in educational enrollment rates, as the younger cohort have performed relatively better at age 15 on reading, vocabulary, and mathematics tests than the older cohort did at the same age. And so really, this is just saying that in the lead up to 2020, the pandemic year, previous Young Lives research had shown that the younger cohort had achieved critical improvements in multiple aspects of human development, and we're really on this trajectory of doing better than the older cohort were at the same age 7 years previously. And so keeping this kind of inter-cohort comparison methodology, in this paper, we were interested in comparing the outcomes of the younger cohort at 19 during the COVID-19 crisis with the older cohort when they were the same age but 7 years previously in 2013. And I haven't put the formal empirical specification on the slide, but really formally to do so, we use something called the difference in difference approach. And essentially this means that we take the difference in average outcomes between the younger and older cohort at age 19 and really just subtract any existing differences that might have already been there between the average outcomes at age 15, really just to highlight the change in the outcomes between the 2 ages. We also actually allow for something called differential linear age trends, which just allows us to assess whether there have been any changes over and above any existing underlying trends that may have already been prevalent before the pandemic. So with this in mind, one of the primary outcomes that we were interested in is that of subjective well-being. And in all Young Lives rounds, subjective well-being has been measured using the Cantrell self-anchoring scale, which is also known as the Cantrell ladder. And so what this asks respondents to do is to visualize a ladder of 9 steps, with the top step representing the best possible life and the worst step representing the worst possible life. Respondents are then asked, with this ladder in mind, to identify which step they'd say they presently stand on. And so figure 4 over here is showing the change in the average subjective well-being ladder step for each cohort over time at the different ages. And what you can see is that it depicts that there's been a striking fall in relative well-being of the younger cohorts compared to the older cohort at the same age when we compare them at age 19, with the exception of Vietnam. Before 2020, the younger cohort had consistently higher well-being at the same ages of 12 and 15 in all 4 countries. You can see here that the younger cohort blue dot is consistently above the older cohort green dot at 12 and 15. But this is now no longer the case in Ethiopia, India, and in Peru. The exception, though, as you can see, is Vietnam, where the gap between the younger and older cohort continued to increase. And, just thinking about the COVID-19 experiences of the 4 countries, this is in line with Vietnam having really been the country that is exceptionally successful at limiting the spread of the virus. I haven't shown the formal results here, but just to say that formally analyzing the results using this difference in difference methodology, we indeed do find that the younger cohort has experienced a significant drop in well-being compared to the older cohort at the same age in Ethiopia, India, and Peru. And these are statistically significant at the 1% level, and that there's been no significant change in Vietnam. And really, when thinking about some of the channels as to why this may be, the descriptive results I presented earlier already point to a number of areas of concern that may explain this drop in relative well-being, such as high reports of economic shock, worsening food insecurity, and interruptions to education. So the results that I've just presented really show a worsening of the life chances of this cohort of adolescents who've been affected by a global pandemic at a very crucial time in their lives. And while these results are by definition short-term, I said the data for most of it had an end date of mid-October 2020. We suggest 2 potential pathways by which the results may be longer lasting or have longer lasting consequences. The first is that a crisis that leads to a sharp drop in well-being may also have mental health consequences. And there's an increasing body of evidence that documents that there's a vicious cycle between poverty and mental health. And in line with this, we found that in all countries except Ethiopia, those who were displaying symptoms consistent with at least mild depression or mild anxiety experienced a significantly larger fall in their subjective well-being kind of average ladder step. And so the danger is then is that given that there's little mental health support in any of the 4 countries, that these symptoms become worse if untreated, and then poor mental health affects later life outcomes such as employment status. And then second, we can just kind of suggestively examine the consequences of school dropout by looking at the trajectories of our older cohort who dropped out of school by age 19. And previous Young Lives research shows that particularly young girls who drop out of school are more likely to get married early and have a child during adolescence than their peers who remained enrolled in school. They're also more likely to have lower aspirations to go on and complete university than their peers. And so again, this suggests that the potential school increase that we're seeing due to COVID-19 may have long-lasting consequences that affect both the earnings potential and the socioeconomic status of our 19-year-old cohort. And so really, just to sum it all up, in this paper, we find that in the pandemic year, the previous gains that the younger cohort had enjoyed in well-being had largely disappeared in all countries except Vietnam, again, the country that had been most successful in limiting the spread of COVID-19. But in all 4 countries, regardless of the intensity of the COVID-19 situation, we'd seen relative losses in educational enrollment and a shift towards these more discriminatory gender roles among our 19-year-old cohort. And so it's likely that the pandemic has engendered losses in well-being, learning, and likely cognitive development for adolescents who are at a very crucial stage in their life and may have potentially significant long-term implications. So just to highlight, if this interested any of you and you'd like to read the full paper, it is out in the preprint in CEPR's COVID Economics, and it's currently under revise and resubmit status in the Journal of Development Studies. So thank you very much, and I hope that you found this interesting.
That was very interesting. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm sure we'll have tons of questions about how you define subjective well-being, about the vision moving forward as well. And, whether, we talk a lot, of course, about the connection between mental health, poverty, and employment, potentially how that could affect these type of outcomes? What about decision making or civic engagement also? Is that part of the subjective well-being? You know, does it matter for these cohorts more than for the previous one? It'd be really interesting to explore that also in the next phase. But really to thank you so much for your presentation. Please read the paper, everyone, and I'm sure that we will circle back also after this conversation about, you know, potential analytical pieces that we could potentially do together on the process recovery and response and recovery. So thank you so much. We will now focus on Ethiopia. We already heard points related to education, food insecurity, but we'll dive in the data further, and we'll zoom in Ethiopia now, hearing from Yitzhak Taferi, who's a senior qualitative researcher at Young Lives Ethiopia, and Alula Pankhurst, a country director of Young Lives Ethiopia. They will discuss aspirations and trajectories to work for young people in the country. Yitzhak, you will first have the floor, and then Alula. Thank you. Yes, Yitzhak, we don't hear you, so I'm just double checking that you're unmute. Good, we can hear you now.
Yeah, okay. I think maybe the connection is poor, so I will keep only the audio.
No problem. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. This is a paper based on the quantitative fifth round of the qualitative study done with grant support from UNICEF and also through collaboration of Policy Study Institute in Ethiopia, which is a partner in Ethiopia with Young Lives. So a fifth round, which is also very important stage of young people's transition from work to school, is one area that we found very interesting. So I will be briefly presenting about what is the transition from school to work. Then Lula will talk about the work itself, how the young people are just experiencing work. The objective is, of course, to understand people's transition from school to work, and also the qualitative study, as we have done for 14 years on 5 sites, 2 urban to rural in 5 regions, and mainly qualitative, but we have made some references to the survey data when we need to talk about the analysis. So we involved the different methods, but here among the 60 children we were following them for the last 14 years, only 27 had made it transition from work to school. So, but it doesn't mean that they have finished school. So that's why we would like to discuss in the challenge. So the key findings to present briefly: school to work, the type of work one may expect in linear or in under normal circumstance. One would expect children will finish school, then go to formal employment. But in our case, that is not the experience. Some have gone to formal employment, very few of them, wage labor, self-employment, and of course, cooperative in micro and small-scale enterprise, which is mushrooming or developing in Ethiopia so much. So among the 60 young people, including the qualitative study, including plus 40 as backups we have, only 27 have made it from school to work. So they have left school, then they have joined the employment or the workforce. So 15 male and 12 female. But unfortunately, just only one girl has finished the university. Although 80% of them, we have followed their aspiration from their childhood, both in survey and qualitative. About 80% were looking to finish university and have formal employment. but just only one of them among the 27 had finished the university and just transferred to work. Others being in college or TVT, and others below, especially before finishing primary or in secondary education. There are different reasons. First, for instance, a lot of reasons for them. Example, one of our case children, which is on the right side, from poor family, school and work become hard for me, then I decide school and do wage labor. So it means that this girl has dropped from grade 8 and the employment activity or activities generate income. So it means for poor families or children of poor families, they may try as much as possible, but it's very difficult to finish education, then they have to drop and just join the labor force. In Ethiopia, those who even don't finish university or even secondary, there is a huge attraction by of huge or bulky employment, what we call cooperatives. So youth cooperatives in Ethiopia is one of the potential area for employment, but it is somehow very gender based in a sense that the activities young people participate or involve are labor intensive and just been more better suitable for boys than girls. That's what is very important in our case. For instance, you see one of in our sites in the northern Tigray, the cobblestone cooperative started in 2013 with membership of 13 young people, but only 2 female girls have been involved, and they are involved in clerical and financial activities. So it's just the income is good. They can earn at 7,000 to 8,000 birr. It means it's about 43 per $1 is 43 birr. So exchange. So people are just using the local resources. For instance, when there is storm pressure or where there is construction, they can use it. In other areas, there is a vegetable growing or livestock fattening. It depends on the community where it is suitable. So this is a huge attraction, but the important issue is that it is more gender biased, and young women are not just benefiting from such cooperatives. So we have a lot of data on that one. Another important one, transition from school to work, is I think usually with very limited job opportunity in Ethiopia, even those who finish university are not just getting jobs. So the transition is not only associated with lower level of education, but also very limited and uncomfortable or just uninspired, because we have registered about, as I said, about 80% of the children from childhood, they were expecting to finish university and have a white collar jobs. But when in the market now, there is no that opportunity. So in some ways, it is discouraging some young people to go to the university. If we are not getting a white collar or good jobs, then why should we spend a lot of time in or investing our time in universities or other things? This is one story. The only girl who finished the university, but still struggling to get a job. I want to get a job that is related to the field. I studied, and it related to the field I studied. It may be any job that any amount of salary, and I want to a job that can I carry out in sitting in office. This is I wish to have myself. I want to work as an accountant in bank, for example. I wish to have such a job that requires less energy. I think this was the expectation of young people just going to university, but she's not getting job, and her brother, who invested a lot on her, says that even the community, when she come back to the community having no job, then the community asking why she's not working. So if there is no employment, so why should we send our children to school? So it's affecting their expectation and aspiration, and sometimes discouraging families to send to school or to the university. That's very important. So from our study, we have a detailed study. I mean, the paper has a lot of on each individual child aspiration, but what they are doing now, then what they are feeling about it, and revising their own childhood aspiration. So the conclusion from our study is school is a protracted process in Ethiopia, not just finishing start grade 1, then finish grade 12 or university, but they go, the transition to the labor market becomes irregular, characterized by multiple and sometimes reverse transition. Sometimes they go to school, then when they have some, they move to, so there is no linear or regular transition from school to work. It is sometimes multiple and sometimes reverse transitions are there. Irregularity, there is no distinct age making at the end of school and beginning of the work. That is one outcome we found from our research. It is irregular. We don't say that they start at the age of 7, finish grade at the age of 18, then they go to university or start. So you have about age of 25, they are grade in primary school, and some of them are just finish primary school, they go to the job. Others finish secondary and go to school. So there is no regularity in transition. There is no distinct age marking the end of schooling and beginning of the work. Overlapping roles, combination of work and school. There is no boundary between work and school, and sometimes we find it very hard to identify whether this young man is a student or a worker. Sometimes they work during the day, and in the evening they go to school. So sometimes in the morning shift, the afternoon they work. So it's very difficult. So the transition is not overlapping. Multiple and reverse transitions, as I said, their roles are reversing sometimes, either student or workers. So one question we raised at the end of the day was, is education fails its promise? Because I mean, in Ethiopia, expansion of schools, primary, secondary, and universities having more than 30 universities in the last 10, 15 years, school has been expanded and parents have been, and young people have been attracted by the motivation to go to school and holding high aspiration, occupational and educational aspiration. But when it goes to transition from school to work, that is not really materializing. That's a big question now. So people are asking, what is education? What is the value of education for employment? Mismatch between young people's aspiration and job opportunities is the major one. Some of them, they can get some jobs, but they say that this is not what we have been aspiring, so they just neglect sometimes to work. There are other hurdles also, not only the mismatch and also the lack of job opportunity, but also poverty, poor quality of education, early marriage, workload. These are some of the interrupting their education. Poor inequality in education, for instance, rural, urban, and girls are affected. TVT training, poor children could not have very quality TVT education, technical school. There are no higher technical levels in rural areas. Girls are always inclined to have training in some housekeeping or nursing, but not other things which are technical and have better market. So it's affecting, there is inequality in that. Limited job opportunities, and which Allah will be discussing, and weaker institutional capacity. So you can see that in the horizon, education, the facilitators, the opportunities are there, which are very limited, but we have such a weaker, very diverse transition. The education, as you can see, the educational level are very different. They can go from either from primary education, secondary, grade 11 or 12, or TVT college or universities to the other jobs, or they may not at different level. The facilitators, the TVT, the Employment Job Creation Commission, which is now being expanded in Ethiopia, Labor Office, and as a local office. So the opportunities are permanent employment, cooperative, wage labor, and self-employment. So there is a multiple of permutations here, but the lesson is there is no regular transition from one formal education into the other formal employment. So what would be the policy implementation? Of course, poverty alleviation is very important, so that you have job opportunities and better education and other things. And young people with poor families can have been supported. School and training, prepare for employment is very important, improve the quality and equality addressing the SDG 4, improvability in terms of resources, capacity, levels. In Ethiopia, we have 1 and 2 are the majority in rural areas, but the market also looks for only for 3 and 4, maybe just technical. Context is important in training. In some areas, construction will be important, so training should be focusing what is a local demand. Career guidance is very important here, addressing the mismatch, provide career information for decision making, but we have to be careful not restrict their aspiration. Those who want to go to university have to be supported so that we don't have to discourage them because there is no opportunity. The opportunity may come at some point when the country develops. Career guidance, including the education and the curriculum, should be integrated into the TV training, so that's very important. Improve institutional capacity of coordinations. We have seen a very limited coordination, so schools, TVs, college, universities, and employers, there should be some coordination. Mediated by facilitating institution, Job Creation Commission in Ethiopia is there, but it should be increased strength. It's at federal and some of regional, but not at local level. More jobs, Alula will be discussing, so encouraging investors, government should encourage private investors to create jobs. Local authorities need to coordinate local communities to share resources for use if self-employment. For instance, as you saw in the quarry, the community should provide free land for quarry or just stone crushers. They should provide grazing land for livestock so that they can do in cooperative. Job needs to reflect the skills and aspirations of young people. I think that's very important. If we are meeting or discouraging young people from aspiring in the long term, then it will be very difficult. That is because that's very important in enhancing human capital development by encouraging families and young people to invest in education, but contribute to the national economy through education. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm conscious of time. It's 9:35 New York time. I mean, we will continue for about 15 minutes. I'll give now the floor to Alula, and then we will give the floor to Pratit and Sudha. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, so this is following on from Yitzhak's presentation. He looked at the transitions from school to work, and then I'm looking at work experiences. It's not, the slide is not moving.
Sometimes there can be a delay of a second. It's not moving.
It seems to be jammed. Okay, well then why don't I can quickly go through that. I've only got 4 slides, so I can quickly let you know what I was going to talk about. So the first point was that what are the enabling factors, and infrastructure and communications were making a very big difference. So I had a quotation of a young woman who was saying how using her mobile phone allowed her to, for her business was really key. She was selling clothes and she had a little shop, and that was really very important. But electricity, mobile phones, etc., really made a big difference. But then when we look at women's work options, gender norms are often quite a big constraint. So I gave an example of a woman who was working in a factory and the problems that she experienced. There's also issues to do with childcare and so forth. And then there was some discussion about the mismatch between jobs and expectations, which Yitzhak already was talking about. And then I moved on to looking at wage labor and how this is not very much seen as a preferred option. So I was quoting a young man who failed his 10th grade exam, who said he was working in a construction sector, and he said, it's not a good job. I do not have any better options. I was unemployed. I do it intermittently, so it does not clash with my education. Day labor work is extremely tiresome. One usually toils the whole day without any break, yet the payment one receives at the end of the day is not worth it, and it's not available most of the time. So most young people preferred to work in their own businesses. And I gave you some examples of a young man who had his little video and music shop, and how he was much happier doing this, supporting himself and his family. But on the other hand, very few were able to succeed in that because of constraints on land, resources, credit, etc. And I gave the voice to a young woman who was talking about how her business was not profitable. She had a cafe, and she said, I'm working because it's better than being idle. From what I earn, I have to pay for house rent. It's not really changing my life. So if it continues like this, I would like to stop and look for work elsewhere, maybe even going abroad to Saudi Arabia. And then I come on to 2 slides, the final 2 slides on policy implications. So 3 points on the first one. One was the mismatch between jobs and graduates' expectations that Isak was talking about, and the need to make skills, focus more on skills and the relevance of the work, the type of training that young people got, the partnerships between the government and private enterprise, promotions by the Jobs Creation Center, and the importance of stimulating non-farm rural livelihoods and diversified job creation options. Then adolescents from poor families were joining the labor market too soon. And here the points that Isak was talking about, flexible schooling and the appropriate type of work for adolescents and preventing harmful and underpaid child labor. And then women being underrepresented in the labor force, the promotion, needing the promotion of women's education and training, equal opportunities, childcare services, and of course, changing societal norms. And then on the last slide, I was talking about some of the problems that working in factories brought about, and the risks, the health risks and the poor conditions and low pay, and the need to monitor health and mitigate environmental risks, regulate working conditions, and negotiate workers' rights and better pay. Then the second point was about the cooperatives and loan modalities that Isak covered, so I won't mention that. And finally, safeguarding and improving livelihoods of the poorest and most vulnerable through promoting better opportunities, education, training, credit access, and social protection. I'm sorry that the slides were not moving, but I think that gives you a bit of a summary.
Thank you very much, and please don't be sorry. We're equally sorry that the meeting room was locked for the beginning of the meeting, which didn't really help people joining, but no problem. We will have your presentation and make it available in on the Spark Blue page. Thank you very much to both of you for this presentation on Ethiopia. I think in particular what you raise about the need to not assume what young people want is really important and be really driven by demand. For the longest time, I think we've seen, we saw at least initiatives and projects really sort of basing their assumptions on myth about also what young people may be interested in or what they may consider as fulfilling their aspirations, or very much driven as well by this idea that young people should be occupied so that they're not turning violent, for instance. Myths that luckily have been busted since then, in particular in the context of the youth peace and security agenda. But there's still a lot to be done to really be driven by data that helps steering projects in that direction. So really appreciate your presentations. I will now give the floor to Pratit from the COVID Under-19 initiative, which is a global survey also analyzing children well-being and aspirations, and data from their own experiences of the COVID-19 pandemic. So it'd be really great, Pratit, to hear about the work that you led, and also hear whether these presentations resonate with the priorities that you saw emerge. Thank you very much, Pratit. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Noella. And I hope I'm audible.
Perfect.
Yeah. So namaste to everyone who's here. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here on the panel this evening. And firstly, I'd like to express how enthralled I am just by observing the work that Young Lives has been doing across countries in terms of involving young people in data, in terms of analyzing what poverty, how poverty has been affecting growth among children and young people. And I feel that it is very important, and particularly at this time when we are in the middle of pandemic, to see how the whole pandemic effect has been on children and young people in particular. Because at this time, as we have been seeing, the pandemic has been showing a lot of disproportionate impact across communities, and especially impacting children and young people. This disproportionality has rolled out really terribly for children belonging to marginalized communities who have been suffering throughout the pandemic. And more importantly, the governments have been failing to take into account and direct their policies towards such children who have been facing the disproportionate impact. And this is mainly because governments have not taken into account the data. The governments have not taken into account what children have been feeling and what children have been experiencing during the pandemic. And this is something that COVID Under 19 initiative is aimed at. And I very much resonate with the initiatives that Young Lives, as Dr. Renu, Richard, and everyone talked about here, on how it is important to take into account what children have been feeling during this time of the pandemic, and to involve children in the whole process of data analysis. And I reflect on what Dr. Renu was mentioning about her experiences of being involved with children. And she said that children felt glad that there was someone to listen to them. And this part of listening is, in fact, I'd like to stress upon that, because this is something that holds relevance, because the United Nations Conventions on Rights of Child, Article 12, guarantees children's the right to be heard when it comes to decisions pertaining to their well-being. And that hasn't really been fulfilled, because we saw the governments, they did take decisions, they did direct their policies towards the well-being of children, but they failed to take into account relevant data. They failed to take into account how children have been reflecting and reacting to these policies which have been impacting them in their personal lives. And that was something which in fact was very much needed to take into account. And that is what COVID Under 19 has been all about. The COVID Under 19 initiative has been an initiative to capture the experiences of children during the pandemic and encapsulate them in form of data. And it has been done through the COVID Under 19 survey, which was a survey developed jointly by Terra de Home and Queen's University Belfast, which led the design and analysis of the survey, involving children and partners as a part of the innovative approach to child rights-based research developed at the Center for Child Rights at Queen's University Belfast. And the survey was taken by 26,000 plus children from all around the world, from 137 different countries. And it rolled out that children did feel that they were not heard during the pandemic. There was a lot of disproportionate impact during the pandemic. And in fact, I'd like to stress on some data which perhaps would resonate with some data that Richard here presented during his presentation. And the data clearly said that only a mere 20% of children felt heard during this pandemic, which was drastic, because considering that so many children were taken into account and only 20% felt heard during that, their governments heard them while taking decisions pertaining to their lives. And more than that, the marginalized communities, out of the children with disabilities, who amounted to 48%, they felt that they were not being heard during the pandemic. And additionally, out of the children from LGBTQI plus communities, only out of the children from LGBTQI plus communities, 51% felt that they were not being heard during the pandemic and were critical of the government's response during the pandemic. And there was a wide disproportionate response to the whole arena of rights of children during this time, because 62% of children in detention centers, refugee camps, and homeless centers said that they hardly had any access to internet. Now, at a time when education moved all online and everything went virtual, children in detention centers in a large number still did not have access to internet, and thus they were deprived of education. And thus the right to education, which is guaranteed to them, they were deprived of that. Then 40% of asylum-seeking children said that they had lesser access to food than before. And 38% of children from migrant communities said the same, that they had lesser access to food than before the pandemic. Now, all this goes on to shows that how the government were not being able to direct their policies towards the keeping in mind the aspects of rights of children during the pandemic. And since the policies were not directed in the proper direction with the data and experiences of children in account, it had led to such violations of rights of children as such, in terms of not getting and ensuring children the right that they have, the right to health, the right to education, the right to nutrition, and other rights that the UNCRC ensures. Now, what has been notable is the fact that governments around the world, and in fact, I feel glad that initiatives like COVID under 19, initiatives like Young Lives have been able to bring children in terms of hearing their experiences, in terms of recording what they have been feeling and experiencing. And it is very significant because when we talk about the regime of rights that children have, we do see that even though the governments are duty bearers and they are at the helm of all the decisions that are to be taken, children are the right holders, and thus they must be taken into account. Because when you are directing policies toward right holders, there needs to be the voices and experiences need to be taken into account. And that is where the significance of governments and the civil society comes in terms of involving children and young people in data, involving children and young people in recording their experiences. Because only when we have that data can we move towards eradicating the impunity that exists, eradicating the poverty that exists. As we know that child poverty has been growing. And in a country like India, where I come from, where around 10 million children are involved in work and labor before the pandemic, where around 42.7 million children were out of schools before the pandemic, according to the ILO. It's alarming to see how disproportionate the impact could be. And it's alarming to see how governments haven't been responsive of this disproportionate response. And so I feel that initiatives like Young Lives and COVID under 19, it is very important, considering the fact that children are being heard and children are being involved in the process of collecting data and are being involved in the process of framing policies and directing policies. In fact, the responsibility of the governments reminds me of a quote that I came across while I was working on a community awareness program with International Justice Mission here in Calcutta, which said that the end of poverty requires the end of violence. The end of violence requires the end of impunity. And the end of impunity requires effective law enforcement and governments to execute their institutions well. And that is the power of the government that we are talking about. So if we see the government, which are at the helm of duty bearing, of executing the policies, we need to make sure that these policies are directed well towards children and young people. And if governments are duty bearers, children and young people are the right holders. And so meaningful and equal partnership is very important between governments, adults, and children and young people, so that there can be actual change that can be materialized, especially when we are planning to build back better at this time. And I'd like to take a minute to talk also about the way forward and talking about COVID under 19 initiative again. So the initiative has been remarkable in not just involving children and hearing their voices through data. It has also involved children in designing of the survey, as well as in involving children in the evaluation of the data and building capacities within them to understand the data that has come out of the survey. And that has been helpful because when the children and young people are capacitated to read data and evaluate and understand what data stands for, it becomes a tool for children's empowerment. And as right holders, it is very necessary to empower children by manifesting capacities within them to understand data and make sense out of data. And that is one thing that I see as a way forward. And secondly, COVID under 19 has also been effective in putting children at the helm of advocating on the basis of data. Because as much as it is important to derive the data, it is also important to advocate on the basis of that data. And to advocate on the basis of data, it is also important to keep children and youth at the helm of this advocacy. And so when children and young people are kept at the helm of advocacy, there's automatically a capacity that is built within them in order to go ahead and advocate for other children who have not been heard, who are not getting platforms to be heard. And that is how we move towards a more effective advocacy, which attracts a more effective policy in terms of rights of children and young people. And so I feel, I again see this as a way forward in terms of advocating for the rights of children, and by other young people and children, by manifesting capacities in them to make sense out of data and to putting them at the helm of advocating for data. And lastly, again, I'd like to remark on how it is also important to build intergenerational partnerships among young people, and that is something that we have been moving forward, because it is through intergenerational partnership, again, that we also see a sense of capacity building within young people. And when this capacity building is manifested, we move towards an effective advocacy for the rights of children. Because we have a long way for us ahead of us in terms of building back better, in terms of recovering from the pandemic. And when we look at those that way, it is a way which is paved for sustainable development and peace. And I constantly get reminded of what Mahatma Gandhi said. He said that if this world has to learn real peace and reach the real peace, we have to start with children. And so it gives me a real pleasure to see that initiatives like Young Lives have been taking up, have been respecting the rights of children, coming and respecting the rights of children to be heard, and have been giving a platform for children to be heard and the governments to execute their policies on that behalf. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pratit. I think everything is said, very powerful reality check also, but also great points on the way forward, and why young people should also be at the helm of collecting data, of analyzing it, of advocating in using this data, etc. So looking forward to continuing these discussions and finding, connecting the dots also between all these different initiatives that are basically trying to do the same and inform policies better, while also respecting and promoting rights. So very compelling. Thank you very much. And I'll now invite Sudha to make some comments, because Sudha is also looking at very effective ways of reporting on progress within the UN system when it comes to the work that we're doing with and for youth. So Sudha, what do you think? What are your reflections? Do you see any potential also for collaboration? Over to you.
Great. Thank you, Noelia, for the invitation. And let me start by saying that great data and terrific insights all through. I've enjoyed every minute of the hour that I've been here. So, where do I start? I have had the pleasure of having interface with Young Lives when I used to work in UNICEF India, and later on in UNICEF headquarters as well. And now in my new role as the head of the Youth 2030 Secretariat, which is the secretariat to bring together the UN Youth Strategy and the implementation across 162 countries. This is like real music in terms of data availability, data research driving policy driving practice. So it's a hell lot of connections. And then, Pratit, you talked about duty bearers and rights holders, and the UN is in a very nicely situated position to actually broker that connection between the governments, the young people, and the UN in terms of the work and with data driving the process. So, I think this is really has been a great conversation. I also want to wear my other hat. I'm a physician and an epidemiologist by training, and I know how tough it is to have cohorts, to set up cohorts, but cohorts are also very notorious for their kind of the track record for loss to follow up. And this is really terrific to see that you have a 90% plus follow up in India, and retention, and 75% in other countries. So it's really fantastic. This is like really great data in terms of what you can get from such cohorts, intergenerational cohorts, and how it can inform policy and programming in countries as well as beyond the countries in the regional context as well. So I wanted to touch on Richard's presentation on the shocks from the COVID and the impact, as well as on the next presentation on the school to work transition, and the third presentation on the work experiences as well. So I think it has been, it's given a tremendous amount of insights into what is happening with these different cohorts of people. And it will be great to actually see how you are connecting some of these data points to actual policy level. And that's where I see, Renu talked about connections with the policy streams in India and how it is informing. I think the more partners that are involved with that, policy advocacy, it would be much more effective in terms of actually bringing on change. And so I see this as a great opportunity to collaborate and partner on many fronts. And to me, this cohort is 4 countries, but the impact goes beyond these 4 countries in terms of informing not only policies in the countries, but also policies across the region. So I think it's on one side, we do think that on the immediate front in terms of COVID response and recovery and what is happening in different contexts and different spaces, it's fantastic, but it's also, there would be greater insights as well as we go forward in terms of how the digital context is shaping some of these responses, or some of these policy responses that need to be shaped as well in terms of education, online education, as Prateek said, or school to work transitions, or transitions into higher education and choice of higher education. Things like digital connectivity, engagement in the digital space to see how information availability and sharing is happening, and how the decision making in young people is actually happening in the new or different context that is emerging to define the future of work. So all in all, the potential is this data itself is very rich, and then we could use it very well into our policy advocacy and some of the decision-making spaces that the UN is currently having in countries. And the Spark Blue is a great platform for that conversations to happen with the communities of practice. So, I think we will have more conversations following this, but, to say that's very inspiring, great data, and great data coming from a cohort can be very, very powerful. So thank you so much. This is like really, really fantastic.
Thank you so much, Sudha. Indeed, I think we're all writing down a lot of points related to potential collaboration in the context of future surveys, in thinking about perhaps emerging issues, as you said, also the future of work, in connection with civic engagement, in connection with perhaps peace building. It'd be really great, of course, to ensure the connections in all these different countries. I mean, this is something we have done from UNDP side now, together with Andy McKay, also from Young Lives. We hope that conversations can happen at country level to identify quick wins, but also longer term ways to collaborate. I mean, thinking about the UN Youth Strategy in particular, I think that both Sudha and I would be really happy to collaborate with Young Lives, on specific papers. I mean, using the data that you already have. So this is something I think to revisit in September if you're interested, of course. And really, I mean, at this stage, I think I just want to give back the floor, to the Young Lives team. If you want, I mean, Dr. Singh and Dimaike is also with us. I mean, who made that contact with UNDP, asking for for an initial conversation about this great work. So feel free, to react on what you've heard. It's really fantastic that we were able to dive a bit deeper in this data today. There are tons, I mean, for participants also, just to say that there is tons of information on your website and it's really admirable as well that all the data is accessible and of course free, etc. So that's an asset for all of us. Andy, you raised your hand. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nuea, for giving me the opportunity. Nuea and I have been talking for quite a long time about in preparation for this, and I'd like to say thanks very much to her and other UNDP colleagues for setting this event up. I think this has been a really good and really effective opportunity and discussion. I'm really grateful. We're really grateful also for the comments of the discussants, which have been very engaged and very helpful. And I think all of us in Young Lives are very excited about follow-up opportunities, scope to work with UNDP moving forward. So thank you very much. I just wanted to say that.
No, thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure really to explore that, to get to know the initiatives better. I think we still have a lot of homework to do, to read all the papers, to make sure that our partners are also aware of this data being out there. So yeah, kudos to you for leading this work, and excited about what is next. Anyone else would like to react from the Young Lives team? No, any burning questions from the audience?
Probably one point.
Yes, Yisak?
Yeah. Thank you very much for organizing this one, and we are very much interested to collaborate. As we have already mentioned, we have done at early stage of children with UNICEF and Save the Children and other collaborators, and it has come to the point where young people are making the critical transition from their childhood into adulthood, where employment is one important aspect, being disrupted by different circumstances, mainly the COVID issue as such. And also something they have been caring for their childhood life, that is aspiration to improve their adulthood life better than their parents through education, where it has been considered as a good value or an asset that can help them to transform from family poverty into a new generation of breaking the intergenerational poverty. So we have a lot of data where starting at the age of 18 until now, different data, but also we can build out on that one, and we can do very specific study, very target studies on the existing data. The existing data provides a lot, but if there are necessary for extras and that for, but to say it again, they are at a critical point of transition from their childhood into adulthood, where a lot of challenges are coming, and because we have been building from their childhood, we have a lot of circumstances that are been affecting at community, policy level, country level, and their individual experience also. So we'll be very happy to collaborate.
Fantastic. It's great to hear, Yisak. So we made the connection also with the UNDP country office. There is in particular, our colleague also from the Accelerator Lab, also in Ethiopia, who's working a lot on youth issues. Ethiopia has been also a fast-track country of the UN Youth Strategy. So maybe with Sudha, we can circle back also on Ethiopia together, making sure that the whole of the UN country team is in the loop for that. And again, thank you so much for doing all this work and making it available and being so open to collaborating. This is great. And if you ever need also support in shaping, I mean, the next questionnaires or the next phases also of that, I think we can both harness, I mean, our own expertise within our entities, but also reach out to young people and youth-led organizations that I'm sure will be willing to participate and collaborate. So that's, as Sudha said, a role of connector that we can very easily play. Any other point before we conclude? And again, everything will be made available on the page. Yes?
I just wanted to, you know, echo what Isaac said, to say that, you know, this is wonderful meeting you all, and we've always worked with partners. That's the only way we know we can, you know, actually have impact. So partnerships for us are really key, and they have been. And, you know, in the past, it has been usually UNICEF, Save the Children, CARE, Plan, because they were children. And now I think the very important point is UNDP becomes a natural ally going forward because of the age of the cohorts. And of course, because we take a life course perspective, I think the fact is that we need to look at transitions seamlessly, as you know, and I think that's what the UN is also trying to do with your own strategy. So I think it's you know, it's a win-win for us to learn from you all as well, and we look forward to engaging in the future.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And let's definitely have a follow-up meeting, I would say, I mean, after the General Assembly, if possible, but let's retake this conversation. And if you need us again to look also at, you know, peer review paper, contribute inputs, check in with partners, we're always available to do that. So thank you very much, and really want to thank all the colleagues who joined. I saw that our colleague Poliey, also from the regional hub in UNDP, was also connected. She had an issue with the internet, but she can also be a very good ally when it comes to the work you're doing in Ethiopia. So feel free to let us know if you need more connections there. Thank you very much, and really want to thank each and every one, and wishing you a good evening. It's very late for you, Pratit, so thank you very much. I imagine for you as well, Renu and other colleagues. Really appreciate your time and your engagement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.